Happy by Derren Brown. It's $9.99 and you can buy it from any good bookshop. I'm hoping that Derren is okay with his fellow 50-year-old reading his book during the lockdown so that other people can perhaps improve their mental health. So thank you in advance, Derren. This is for the pig lace. That's the things are not all as graspable and sayable as on the whole we are led to believe. Most events are unsayable, occur in a space that no word has ever penetrated. This quote is from Letters to a Young Poet, Rainer Maria Rilke. I'm going to read one chapter a day, and we need, for the first one, we've got a smiley. That's this yellow smiley on the page here, and you need to see that so you know what we're reading about. Let us begin. He is ubiquitous, at once irreproachable and black-eyed sinister. He cheers us for a moment before we sense a sneer. He is the rubber stamp guarantee of congeniality, designed for contagion, a morale-boosting initiative for a life assurance company in the 1960s, disseminated into the world in the form of 50 million black on yellow badges, the hallmark of 70s psychedelia and 80s electronic music, dance music. He is the glaze ecstasy of the narcotically compelled. Today, he is such a familiar currency in electronic communication that the modern iconoclast's first break with convention is a decision not to use him. In England, the smiley, or his sideways colon parenthesis cousin, provides a familiar sign-off where an X would seem too intimate. And in an age of typed communication where tone of voice is not conveyed, it is important shorthand. I am happy. Now, you should be happy. It reports that no offence has been meant, that one's intentions are entirely benign, and the warm lubricant of assured conviviality will smooth any further communication. But within it lies the troubling behest to be cheerful, and the childish contours of this exaltation's grinning emblem tell us that nothing should be simpler. Yet, the desire to be happy, to obtain happiness, to claim our right to be happy, remains the most enduring and conspicuously self-defeating aspect of our modern condition. Part 1. Beginnings. Chapter 1. Once upon a time. A while ago, my long-term friend and collaborator Andy Nyman told me the following story. Andy, an actor with a strong fan base, had emerged from the stage door after a show to find waiting for him a lost-looking, nervous young girl, perhaps 14 years old, barely able to make eye contact. Her mother, who was clutching a small camera, stood next to her. The mother asked if her daughter might get a photograph with him. He happily agreed, and the girl wordlessly stepped forward and wrapped an arm tightly around his torso. He could feel her trembling at his side as they posed. He grinned dutifully, and as the mother took the picture, Andy sensed that the girl had neither smiled nor properly faced the camera. He asked to look at the picture on the camera's viewing screen, and there he was, looking the picture of happiness, while the poor soul next to him had indeed been caught with her eyes half shut and expression indistinct. "Do you want to do that again? You weren't smiling," he asked the girl. The mother answered for her. "Oh, she always looks terrible in pictures." My friend was taken aback by her words. "Don't say that," he protested in defence of the daughter. The girl spoke up for the first time. "Oh, it's okay. It's true." In that brief exchange over a photograph, there also appeared to be a snapshot of a life. One of wretched self-esteem for the girl and its apparent maternal origins. Instead of helping to encourage and nurture her child at all times, as we would hope, the mother, it would certainly seem, is instead helping to perpetuate a crippling lack of self-belief. The damning word in the mother's remark is always, because always tells us there is a pattern, a story at work. And stories affect us deeply. When I perform my day job as a kind of magician, I work with people's capacity to fool themselves with stories. A good magic trick forces the spectator to tell a story that arrives at an impossible conclusion, and the clearer the story is, the better. Normally, everything you need to solve the puzzle happens right in front of you, but you are made to care only about the parts that the magician wants you to. When you join up those dots, so misleadingly and provocatively arranged, you are left with a baffling mystery. A good magician might make the trick mean more by elevating it beyond the mere disappearance or transposition of some props. If it can be made to feel somehow relevant to you rather than a mere display of skill, then the story is likely to have more import and the trick more impact. If magic exploits our capacity to continuously, unconsciously modify events in the ongoing world to form a story, even at the expense of everything we know to be possible in the universe, then we are indeed master editors, working tirelessly to communicate to others and ourselves a meaningful tale. We turn the memory of a holiday or a meal into something entirely wonderful or completely appalling, depending on the story we have decided for ourselves of a successful or failed event. We adjust details and selectively remember what fits into our preferred narrative. When a relationship ends, we may one day recall all the good times we shared with that person, and the next day all the bad. These stories shift and change. We are, each of us, a product of the stories we tell ourselves. Some of the stories are brief and inconsequential, allowing us to get through our day and make sense of other people. I'll do this and head to the shops and get that done, and then I'll be able to completely relax this evening. Or, she was snappy because really she's worried that I'm putting other people before her. She does that because she's insecure. These are neat narratives that allow us to arrange complicated reality into a satisfying and tidy parcel and move on with our lives. Without them in place, we would see only a mess of details. If we were unable to form meaningful patterns, our lives would become overwhelmed. Other stories, like the one we sense the girl at the stage door is learning from her mother, become deeply ingrained and in many ways define who we are. We tell ourselves tales about the future. Oh, I'm an awkward misfit who looks terrible and always will. Or, I'll never have a fulfilling relationship. Other stories are about the past. I'm like this because my parents treated me in a particular way. Or, I'm an unlucky person, always have been. Yet, our entire past, which we feel, in many ways correctly, is responsible for how we behave today, is itself just a story we're telling ourselves in the here and now. We join the dots to tell one tale when we consider how, for example, we came to this point in our career. Another when we consider how we developed our psychological foibles or strengths. It's hard to think about your past without tidying it up into a kind of story, one in which you are cast as the hero or victim. Invariably, we ignore the regular dice rolls of chance or random luck. Successful high flyers are typically prone to ignoring the interplay of blind fortune when they credit their career trajectories to their canny business sense or brute self-belief. We tell the story we want to tell, and we live out those stories every day. Some of these stories are consciously constructed, but others operate without our knowledge, dictated by scripts handed to us by others when we were young. We can carry around the psychological legacy of our parents for our whole lives, whether bad or good. Where they have unfulfilled wishes and regrets, these are commonly passed to us as a template for storytelling. Many of these templates make it hard for us to feel happy. You must achieve impressive things to be happy/loved. Or, you must sacrifice your own happiness to make others feel better. That is the measure of your worth. Similar insidious directives can also come from the church, our peers, classmates and teachers. The cumulative effect of the news media we encounter daily, or any number of ideologies in which we find ourselves enmeshed. With these overarching stories or templates in mind, we repeatedly arrange our lives in such a way as to let events and others reinforce the same familiar message, like a child's fable. Again and again, many people play out the same story. That they surely cannot be easy to love. That love and admiration are dependent on career success. That others will always disappoint us. The greatest burden a child must bear is the unlived life of the parents, wrote the legendary psychoanalyst Carl Jung. Whatever we've taken from them, the founding story of our lives, imposed on us by a mother and father who in turn inherited a faulty script from their own parents, isn't even ours. This book is at heart about how we might take control of those stories with a view to living more happily. 2,000 years ago, a Roman slave called Epictetus, a prominent figure in the ancient school of Stoic philosophy, which remained the most prevalent school of thought for 500 years before Christianity exploded into the world, gave voice to the notion: what upsets people is not things themselves, but their judgments about these things. In other words, it is not events out there that cause our problems, but rather our reactions to them, the stories we tell ourselves. This might of ancient wisdom is the source of many modern-day self-help and therapeutic methods of varying substance, including neuro-linguistic programming, NLP, cognitive behavioral therapy, CBT, and the 60s mantra of change your head, don't change the world. Shakespeare gave us the same thought through Hamlet. There is nothing either good or bad, but thinking makes it so. Later in the 19th century, Arthur Schopenhauer a philosopher with whom we will spend time in this book, echoed the maxim less snappily. If we leave out grave misfortune, less depends in the good things as well as in the bad on what befalls and happens to us in life than on the way in which we feel it, and thus on the nature and degree of our susceptibility in every respect. A true Stoic would frown at the exception of grave misfortune. But let's dwell a moment longer on Epictetus's extraordinary thought. Perhaps the first mark of emotional maturity is to realize that there is an enormous gulf between the events of the world and what we do with them. Out there and in here are two very different kingdoms, and other people are not accountable for how we feel. No one, however ludicrously they behave, has the right or the direct means to affect your self-control or dignity. No one need annoy us so much that we in turn become a source of annoyance to others. In fact, the Stoics have some powerful advice about how to appreciate and maintain a distinction between the outer and inner worlds, and therefore how to reduce our levels of anxiety. And when we grasp that we do not need to react unhappily to events in the way to which we are accustomed, and thus begin to question our relationship with those aspects of the outer world, we can apply the same understanding more deeply to our inner world and the story we tell ourselves every day about who we are. That can change too. It is, after all, a fiction. I came across a nice analogy in David McRaney's book, You Are Not So Smart, that has stayed with me. When a movie begins with the words, based on a true story, what crosses your mind? Do you assume every line of dialogue, every bit of clothing and song in the background is the same as it was in the true event on which the film was based? Of course you don't. You know movies like Pearl Harbor or Erin Brockovich take artistic license with facts, shaping them so a coherent story will unfold with a beginning, middle and end. Even biopics about the lives of musicians or politicians who are still alive are rarely the absolute truth. Some things are left out, or some people are fused into single characters. The details you think when watching are less important than the big picture, the general idea. If only you were so savvy when it came to looking back on the biopic in your head. We are trapped inside our own heads. Our beliefs and understandings about the world are limited by that perspective. Schopenhauer wrote, "Every man takes the limits of his own field of vision for the limits of the world." Of course, then, we mistake that story we've constructed of our lives as the truth. Interestingly, we are prey to an analogous error every waking moment of our lives. You have a blind spot in your vision where you can't see anything. We all have one. You can find it by extending your right arm and pointing the thumb straight up in front of you. Close your left eye and look straight ahead with your right. Level with, but a little way to the left of that thumb. Now slowly move the thumb from side to side, keeping it level with your gaze until part of it disappears. Experiment long enough and you'll find your blind spot if you haven't already tried something similar as a child. Remove the thumb and the blind spot is still there, but you won't be aware of it, as your brain is filling in the gap like a Photoshop clone tool in order to provide a seamless viewing experience. Look around your environment now. You're editing what you see. Your eyes will probably dart from one point of interest to another. There is an infinite data source around you, but you are selecting, deleting, cloning and generalizing from that source in order to provide a working model of your environment in which you can effectively function. You simply can't take it all in at once, so you decide what might be important and largely make up the rest. We err on the side of caution, thus an unexpected movement will attract our eye, in case it signifies a threat, while at a deeper level we will assign undue weight to a look or tone of voice from another person because it confirms for us some ingrained fear. Even at this immediate visual level, we are missing a huge amount of information, preferring to go with an easy summation of our environment. We can look for our keys and not see them right in front of us if we don't believe they're there. When it comes to telling stories, It's easier to see this editing process at work in other people than ourselves. When someone tells you about an argument they were involved in, do you not administer a dose of scepticism? You know you're hearing only their version of the events. They've turned something complex into a neat story, usually one that leaves them suspiciously blameless. You know there will be a lot more to it that's been left out. How frustrating or antagonistic they may have been themselves. How the other person may have been misunderstood. You know that events have been exaggerated or simplified so that the person can get their point across. Do we ever think to take the same sceptical view of that one story that affects our life the most? Would we consider applying the same wry attachment to the private tale of who we are? How might we even gain the necessary vantage points to consider our stories when we are tucked away within them? We will look at ways of gaining that perspective, but if we don't consider how to view it for what it is, the negative aspects of that story will trap us. Feelings of anxiety and helplessness can become all too familiar, and as we'll discover, overt optimism tends to leave us defenceless and flailing too. Here's a way you can see that negative storytelling take root within 5 minutes. Try a little exercise in the form of solving some anagrams. Ready? Each word I will give you below is an anagram of another word, so you must try to unscramble each example to form another word that can be made from its letters. They're not supposed to be difficult, and you should be able to solve each in 5 or so seconds. If you don't unscramble it in that time, move on to the next one. Here we go with the first one. Rearrange the letters to make another word. Solve this before you move on to the next, or, well, limit yourself to 5 seconds effort before continuing. Did you get it? Here's another one to unscramble. Five seconds limit again. Easier? More difficult? Last one. Done? How many did you solve? If you were to attend a class run by Charlize Nixon at Penn State Erie University, and if you happened to sit on the left-hand side of the room, you might be handed that list of anagrams to try to solve. Unbeknownst to you, your fellow students across from you on the right-hand side were handed another list of anagrams. Tab, lemon, cinerama. Note that in each list, the last word is the same. Now here's the ruse. The first 2 words on your list, whirl and slapstick, are unsolvable anagrams. They can't be unscrambled. So apologies for wasting 10 seconds of your valuable time here. The first 2 on the list, handed to the other people, are easily solvable. Bat and melon are simple enough to decipher. But of course, you all presume you have been given the same words. Nixon asks people to raise their hands when they've solved the first word. You see a lot of hands go up. You may not realise they belong only to the students on the other side of the room, and you feel frustration that you couldn't unscramble whirl. What have they seen that you haven't? Now you're told to try the next word and raise your hand when you've got it. Again, you can't see any solution. Other hands go up. The same hands as before, of course. Your frustration increases. You feel stupid and rushed. You've already given up. And now the third word. Did you solve it when you tried a moment ago? Cinerama can be unscrambled fairly easily to form American. But did you spot it? Most likely not, especially not if you were trying this in Nixon's classroom, and neither did the others sitting on your side of the class. But the students on the right-hand side got it. All their hands went up again. The right-hand side solved the anagram. The left didn't. Nixon uses this neat experiment to demonstrate a phenomenon called learned helplessness. Sitting over on the left, struggling with a task that is supposed to be easy, and seeing others raise their hands to acknowledge their success, you feel like a failure. That becomes your story. I can't do this. I shall fail at this task. So you give up, preferring to repeat the story you have learned. I can't do this exercise. And the result is that you cannot unscramble Cinerama, something you would otherwise be very likely to do. Meanwhile, those on the right-hand side, enjoying their first two successes and feeling good about themselves, comfortably solve the final anagram. As Nixon points out, there are social implications for this learned helplessness. She has a deep interest in the problem of bullying in schools and finding practical ways of optimizing children's development. If a child becomes a victim of aggression and feels helpless, he or she is less likely to try to stand up to bullying in the future. And likewise for most of us. When we feel from previous experience that we're no good at a task, we act out that helpless role when we're faced with it again. And bullying is not always overt or conscious. A mother's repeated disparagement of her daughter's looks can easily have the same effect. The good news is that we can give ourselves permission to change our story, to act differently, to remind ourselves that we are not characters in a movie based on a true story, whose personalities are clearly defined and predictable. We, unlike them, can act out of character. In a programme I made on the subject of placebo, an actor playing a doctor injected volunteers with what they believed to be a wonder drug, which was followed up by a course of pills. Each group of participants was formed of people with specific problems or traits who were told that the drug was made to dramatically improve their particular situation. For example, a group of people suffering from debilitating anxieties was told it would remove the capacity for fear. A separate band of smokers was assured it would banish the desire for cigarettes, and so on. In each case, the participants were told they need make no effort themselves. The drug would do all the work. Results can be seen in the 2012 Channel 4 show Fear and Faith Part 1. Nick, a chap with a crippling social anxiety, goes on to break up a fight in a pub and brilliantly overcomes his fears. Dan, who had a fear of heights so paralysing that he couldn't walk over a tiny stone bridge in his village, stands proudly on the edge of a viaduct with a drop of hundreds of feet beneath him, arms extended, soaking up his transformation. And smokers stop without any discernible effect. Nicky, who had tried every patch and method to give up previously, had been rewarded only with stress and failure. Following the placebo, she finds herself no longer thinking about cigarettes and can't believe how effective the magic medicine has been. The injections and pills, of course, were fakes. The injection was saline, and the pills contained only icing sugar. The dramatic transformations of the volunteers came about because they gave themselves permission to act differently. The idea of this drug coursing through their veins was enough to make them change their stories about who they were. I am no longer the person with this problem, because a new medicine is solving that for me. Perhaps most astonishing was the story of one chap who suffered from dermatitis so badly that he hadn't been able to wear his wedding ring for years. At work he had to wear special gloves. For legal reasons, we couldn't tell him the drug would cure that condition. We were only permitted to say it would cure hay fever and similar allergies. And we were all astonished when he reported that the Rumyodin, if you wish to rediscover faith in your anagram skills, you can unscramble the name I gave the drug, had cured his skin condition too. It was truly remarkable. The initial administration of the drug via injection was followed by homework. They had to report to us all the positive changes they were noticing. Naturally, this task would encourage them to live out their new story each day. This is confirmation bias at work, one of the most reliable cognitive snares to which we are prone. Confirmation bias occurs when we notice things in the world that support our beliefs and pay less attention to the things that contradict them. People fall into this trap when they notice the times their prayers have been answered, but explain away or ignore the many more times they haven't. Similarly, we operate under its influence whenever we notice the annoying habits of someone we dislike more than their pleasant ones. Confirmation bias provides daily all the evidence we need to keep the storyline we've created for our life continuing in the same vein and looking like the truth. In the Fear and Faith program, we were harnessing confirmation bias to focus the participants on new, more helpful stories. The result was that their dramatic changes in these people's lives, once their old stories were interrupted and sent off in a new direction, happened effortlessly. This book is the result of many years of interest in what makes us happy, what happiness means, and how we might find more of it for ourselves. Over recent years, my television shows have involved unwitting subjects who have found their inner heroes and learnt to engage with lives they were letting slip by unlived. But the neatly packaged ideas that constitute such small screen viewing material belie a much richer fascination with what constitutes a happy life. And for me, this question is brought into focus by the regular influx of deeply unhelpful messages we receive about what happiness should be. You may consider yourself happy enough already, or very unhappy. You may have strong ideas about what the good life is all about, or perhaps you've never thought about it. There is sadly a wealth of self-help literature and societal pressure regarding the pursuit of happiness, which can be deeply counterproductive and lead simply to more anxiety. Many of the routes to happiness and success with which you may be familiar, such as positive thinking, self-belief and setting goals, can be, as I hope to show you, disastrous to follow. I'm going to draw on some of my favourite thinking from the last 2 millennia, most of which will come from a time when philosophers, literally lovers of wisdom, were concerned with how we might best live. For some time now, philosophy and psychology have existed as very separate disciplines. The latter more concerned with observing or fixing pathologies than studying how we might most happily live out our short lives. And then recently, visionaries in both fields have again found common ground. Martin Seligman and a wake of other positive psychologists have attempted to redress the balance by looking at what empirical psychological research can teach us about flourishing. Psychologists, they feel, have the opportunity to best equip themselves with solid, reliable research into what makes us happy. than to pass that on to those who need to hear it, rather than leaving it to self-help gurus who normally only have flimsy anecdotal support for their claims. Meanwhile, in the other camp, public philosophers such as Alain de Botton have sometimes risked derision to publish books or establish institutions designed to take a dry and analytical field back to its humanitarian roots. They have dared to remind us how the great thinkers of history might help us navigate our modern world contentedly and with minimal trauma. I will try to glean from these twin disciplines the most helpful and effective ideas about how to flourish and live most happily. I will favour those ideas that work well for me. But on that note, perhaps you balk at the very idea of anyone with the advantages of financial success and mediocre fame offering thoughts on happiness. I can hear the complaint of, "It's all very well for some," sounding from you and other shoppers as you disparagingly skim this volume's back cover in remainder and charity bookshops across the country. These are not simply the thoughts of a man trying to shed a measure of guilt after being paid handsomely for his fatuous peacockery. The practical advice and ways of thinking that I offer here are from intellectual giants and astonishing thinkers. Furthermore, the ideas I shall present articulate the priorities I instinctively had in place well before my career took off, at a time when I was claiming what was then called housing benefit and trying to scrape together a living as a table magician. And as we'll discuss later, fame and success do very little to affect one's level of happiness. It seems there can be some financial element at play, in that we report feeling less happy when we earn under a certain comfortable amount. However, when we earn over that figure, more money does not make us incrementally happier. That magic number seems to vary greatly according to what study you read. Depends on the cost of living, wherever the study was carried out, and is rendered even less meaningful when you take on board that the type of job you do makes a huge difference to your happiness. According to a recent Cabinet Office report, for example, clergy reported substantially greater levels of happiness on an income of about £20,000 at the time, in contrast to lawyers, who tend to be noticeably unhappy and earn much more. So while it remains clear that having less than you need is a source of unhappiness, having more than you need does not make you happier. Let us then be willing for a while to entertain the notion that the story we tell ourselves of our lives is a confabulation, a fiction. Ultimately, we will need some sort of story in place, for without one we would lack any coherent sense of identity. But perhaps, for a while, we can gently reconsider our personal tale and see whether it can be shaped more effectively through a little editing and polishing, or at least be open to improvement. We need not do this with a view to drastically altering our identity, although changes might be profound. As a light briefly flares between the eternities of darkness that precede and follow us, our concern is to make sure that we enjoy its fugitive consolation. And we can start by ridding ourselves of the most pervasive myth of them all.